What happens when Hollywood sweetheart meets daytime television's queen, and the gloves come off in the most explosive interview ever caught on camera. Today, we're diving into the shocking confrontation that left Cameron Diaz storming off Kelly Clarkson's show after what started as a friendly chat turned into an all-out verbal battlefield. This is the story of how two beloved celebrities went from pleasantries to pure poison in a matter of minutes. And trust me, you won't believe what Kelly said that pushed Cameron over the edge. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because this story gets wilder with every passing moment. The morning started like any other at the Kelly Clarkson Show studios. Cameron Diaz had arrived early looking radiant in a flowing cream-colored dress, her signature blonde hair perfectly styled. She was there to promote her return to acting after years away from Hollywood. A comeback story that should have been heartwarming and inspirational. The production assistants buzzed around her, offering coffee and pastries, all smiles and professional courtesy. Cameron seemed relaxed, even excited, chatting with the makeup artist about her new projects and how good it felt to be back in front of the cameras. Kelly Clarkson swept into the green room about 20 minutes before taping, her energy immediately shifting the atmosphere. She wore a bold red blazer that commanded attention, her presence filling the space in a way that made everyone else seem smaller. When she spotted Cameron, her smile was bright, but there was something calculating behind her eyes. Something that made Cameron's stomach tighten, just slightly. "Cameron, darling, so good to see you," Kelly said, her voice carrying that trademark warmth that millions of viewers had come to love. But Cameron, who had been in Hollywood long enough to recognize the difference between genuine warmth and manufactured charm, noticed the way Kelly's eyes didn't quite match her smile. "Kelly, thanks for having me," Cameron replied, standing to embrace her host. The hug was brief, almost perfunctory, and Cameron caught the faint scent of Kelly's expensive perfume mixed with something that reminded her of ambition. "I have to say, I'm so curious about this whole comeback thing," Kelly continued, settling into the chair across from Cameron in the green room. "I mean, you were gone for what, 8 years? That's practically a lifetime in Hollywood years." There it was, the first little jab disguised as curiosity. Cameron had been warned by her publicist that Kelly sometimes liked to push boundaries, but she had expected it to happen on camera, not in private moments before the show. "Well, I wouldn't call it gone," Cameron said carefully, her media training kicking in. "I was just focused on other aspects of my life, my family, personal growth." Kelly nodded, but her expression suggested she wasn't buying it. "Right. Of course. It's just interesting how some people can just step away and expect to step right back in, like the industry should just wait for them." The comment hung in the air between them, sharp and pointed. Cameron felt her cheeks flush slightly, not from embarrassment, but from the first stirrings of irritation. She had dealt with difficult interviewers before, but usually they saved their attacks for when the cameras were rolling. "I think the industry values authentic storytelling and genuine talent," Cameron replied, her voice steady, but with an edge that hadn't been there moments before. "And I've always been committed to bringing authenticity to everything I do." "Authenticity," Kelly repeated as if tasting the word. "That's such an interesting concept in Hollywood, isn't it? I mean, what's authentic about disappearing for years and then expecting everyone to welcome you back with open arms?" Before Cameron could respond, a production assistant knocked on the door. "Ladies, we're ready for you on set." As they walked toward the stage, Cameron's mind was racing. She had expected some challenging questions about her hiatus, but Kelly's attitude was already more confrontational than she had anticipated. Still, she was a professional, and she had handled worse situations before. How bad could it really get? The studio audience was already seated and energetic, their applause warm and welcoming as Cameron took her place on the familiar couch setup. The bright lights were comforting in their familiarity, and for a moment, Cameron felt her confidence return. This was her element, after all. She had charmed audiences for decades. Kelly settled into her chair with practiced ease, her red blazer catching the studio lights perfectly. The cameras began rolling, and suddenly Kelly was all smiles again, her voice taking on that honey-sweet tone that had made her a daytime television favorite. "I'm here with the absolutely gorgeous Cameron Diaz," Kelly began, and the audience erupted in applause. "Cameron, first of all, you look incredible, absolutely stunning." "Thank you so much, Kelly. It's wonderful to be here," Cameron replied, her smile genuine despite the tension from their backstage encounter. "Now, let's talk about this return to acting," Kelly continued, leaning forward slightly. You've been away from Hollywood for quite some time. Some might say you abandoned your fans when you were at the peak of your career. The word abandoned hit Cameron like a slap. It was a deliberate choice designed to put her on the defensive. From the very first question, she could feel the audience's energy shift slightly, sensing the undercurrent of hostility beneath Kelly's cheerful exterior. I wouldn't use the word abandoned, Cameron said, her media training helping her maintain composure. I made a conscious choice to focus on my personal life, to be present for my family. I think my fans understood and respected that decision. Did they, though? Kelly pressed, her smile never wavering, but her eyes growing sharper. I mean, you were making movies like Charlie's Angels, There's Something About Mary, these huge hits that people loved, and then you just walked away. Some people might call that selfish. Cameron felt her jaw tighten. The interview was barely 2 minutes old, and Kelly was already going for the throat. I think it's important for people to make choices that align with their values and priorities. Being present for my daughter, being a good mother. Those were my priorities. Right. But you're not the only actress who's had children, Kelly shot back. Plenty of women manage to balance motherhood and career. What made you so special that you had to choose one or the other? The question was loaded with implications, suggesting that Cameron was either incompetent at balancing responsibilities or somehow privileged enough to make choices other women couldn't. Cameron could feel her temper starting to rise, but she forced herself to remain calm. Every woman's situation is different. Kelly, I was fortunate enough to have the financial security to make that choice, and I made it deliberately and thoughtfully. Financial security, Kelly repeated, and there was something almost mocking in her tone. Yes, I suppose when you're worth hundreds of millions of dollars, it's easy to just walk away from the people who made you that wealthy in the first place. The studio audience was completely silent now, sensing that this was no ordinary interview. Cameron could feel their attention like a weight, could sense their discomfort with the increasingly hostile direction of the conversation. My fans have always been incredibly supportive, Cameron said, her voice beginning to show strain. And I've always been grateful for that support. But I also think they understand that I'm a human being with a life outside of entertainment. Kelly leaned back in her chair, her smile widening in a way that didn't reach her eyes. Of course. But now you're back, and I have to ask, what makes you think audiences still want to see you? I mean, Hollywood has moved on. There are so many talented young actresses now. Isn't this comeback just a little bit desperate? The word desperate landed like a physical blow. Cameron felt her cheeks burn, not with embarrassment now, but with genuine anger. The audience audibly gasped, clearly shocked by the brutal directness of the question. I don't think passion for your craft is ever desperate, Cameron replied, her voice tight with controlled fury. I'm returning to acting because I love it. Because I have stories I want to tell, not because I need validation from anyone. Stories you want to tell. Kelly mused. Or maybe you're running out of money. I mean, even hundreds of millions doesn't last forever, especially with the lifestyle you've been living. Cameron stared at Kelly in disbelief. This wasn't an interview anymore. It was an ambush, a deliberate attempt to humiliate her on national television. She could see the cameras capturing every expression, every moment of her growing fury. And she knew that Kelly was doing this intentionally, feeding off the drama like a parasite. I think my financial situation is my own business, Cameron said, her voice dangerously quiet. And I'm not sure what relevance it has to my return to acting. Oh, it has every relevance, Kelly replied, her mask finally slipping completely. Because authenticity, which you mentioned earlier, means being honest about your motivations. And I think your real motivation here isn't artistic passion. It's financial desperation disguised as a heartwarming comeback story. Cameron's eyes flashed with a fire that Kelly had clearly underestimated. The accusation of financial desperation had crossed a line that even Hollywood's most seasoned professionals rarely dared to cross during a televised interview. The studio audience sat in stunned silence, many of them shifting uncomfortably in their seats as they witnessed what was supposed to be a light-hearted celebrity chat transform into something far more sinister. Financial desperation, Cameron repeated, her voice rising slightly despite her efforts to maintain composure. Kelly, I have to say, this is probably the most unprofessional interview I've ever experienced, and that's saying something considering I've been doing this for over 20 years. Kelly's smile grew wider, clearly energized by Cameron's visible anger. She leaned forward in her chair like a predator sensing weakness, her eyes gleaming with the kind of malicious joy that comes from successfully baiting someone into losing their cool on national television. Unprofessional? Kelly laughed, and there was nothing pleasant about the sound. I think asking direct questions is exactly what professional journalism looks like. Maybe you're just not used to people being honest with you anymore. Maybe everyone's been telling you what you want to hear for so long that you've forgotten what real questions sound like. Cameron felt her hands clench into fists in her lap, but she forced herself to keep them steady. She could see the cameras focused on her, could imagine the headlines that would emerge from this disaster of an interview, and she knew that Kelly was counting on her to explode, to give her the viral moment that would dominate social media for weeks. There's a difference between asking direct questions and being deliberately cruel, Cameron replied, her voice steadier now, but carrying an unmistakable edge of warning. I came here as your guest, Kelly. I came here to have a conversation, not to be attacked. Attacked? Kelly's eyebrows shot up in mock surprise. Cameron, sweetheart, if you think these are attacks, then maybe you really aren't ready for a comeback. This industry eats people alive. And if you can't handle a few honest questions from someone who's actually supporting the industry day in and day out, then maybe you should go back to your comfortable retirement. The condescension in Kelly's voice was unmistakable now, and Cameron could see several audience members exchanging shocked glances. This wasn't entertainment anymore. It was cruelty disguised as journalism, and everyone in the studio could feel it. Supporting the industry. Cameron's voice took on a dangerous quiet. Kelly, you host a talk show. You interview people who actually create the content that your audience cares about. Don't confuse yourself with the artists who risk everything to tell stories that matter. Kelly's smile faltered for just a moment, a flash of genuine anger breaking through her carefully constructed facade. Cameron had struck a nerve, hitting directly at Kelly's insecurities about her place in the entertainment hierarchy. Risk everything? Kelly's voice sharpened. That's rich coming from someone who walked away the moment things got challenging. You know what real risk looks like, Cameron? It's showing up every single day, building something lasting, creating a platform that actually matters to people's lives, not running away when the going gets tough, and then expecting everyone to welcome you back when you get bored. Cameron stood up abruptly, her chair rolling backwards slightly from the force of her movement. The audience gasped audibly, sensing that they were about to witness something unprecedented in daytime television history. You know what, Kelly? Cameron said, her voice carrying clearly across the suddenly silent studio. I've been in this business long enough to recognize jealousy when I see it. And I think what's really bothering you isn't that I left. It's that I had the freedom to leave. It's that I had enough success, enough security, enough genuine accomplishment that I could make choices about my own life. Kelly's face flushed red, her carefully applied makeup, unable to hide the genuine fury that Cameron Unk's words had triggered. She stood up as well, the two women now facing each other across the coffee table like gladiators in an arena. Jealousy. Kelly's voice was getting louder now, her professional composure completely abandoned. Of what exactly? Of someone who peaked 20 years ago and is now desperately trying to claw her way back to relevance. Of someone who thinks she can just waltz back into Hollywood and pick up where she left off like nothing happened. I think you're jealous of someone who had the courage to put family first. Cameron shot back, her own voice rising to match Kelly's volume. I think you're jealous of someone who didn't have to compromise their values to stay relevant. And I think you're jealous of someone who built something real instead of just talking about other people's accomplishments every day. The insult hit its target perfectly. Kelly's entire career was built on interviewing others, on being the conduit for other people's stories rather than creating her own. Cameron had identified the deepest insecurity that plagued every talk show host. The nagging question of whether they were actually contributing anything meaningful to the world of entertainment. How dare you? Kelly hissed, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than her earlier shouting. How dare you come onto my show, my stage, and insult everything I've built? You think because you made a few movies that people remember fondly, you're somehow above the rest of us who actually work for a living. Cameron laughed, but there was no humor in it. Work for a living? Kelly, you sit in a chair and ask people about their projects. I spent decades creating characters, telling stories, making people laugh and cry and think. Don't you dare lecture me about work. The two women were standing barely 3 feet apart now, their voices carrying across a studio so quiet that the audience could probably hear their own heartbeats. The cameras continued rolling, capturing every moment of what was quickly becoming the most explosive interview in daytime television history. You want to know what I think? Kelly said, her voice trembling with barely controlled rage. I think you're a has-been who can't accept that Hollywood moved on without you. I think you're terrified that nobody cares about Cameron Diaz anymore, and you're desperately hoping that one good movie will make people forget that you abandoned them when they needed you most. Cameron stared at Kelly for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice was deadly calm. And I think you're a bitter woman who built a career on other people's talent and can't stand being in the same room with someone who actually has some. The studio erupted, not in applause, but in gasps and murmurs of shock as the audience realized they were witnessing something that would be talked about for years to come. Several people in the front row were holding up their phones, clearly recording despite the studio's policies against it. Kelly's face was now completely red, her chest heaving with fury. "Get out," she said, her voice shaking. "Get out of my studio right now." Cameron smiled for the first time since the interview began, but it wasn't a pleasant expression. "Gladly," she said, already moving toward the edge of the stage. "This has been enlightening. Kelly really showed me who you actually are underneath all that fake sweetness." But Kelly wasn't finished. Even as Cameron began to walk away, clearly intent on leaving with whatever dignity she could salvage from this disaster, Kelly's voice followed her across the stage. "That's right. Run away again," Kelly called out, her voice carrying a cruel satisfaction. "Just like you always do when things get uncomfortable. Just like you did with your career." Cameron stopped dead in her tracks, her shoulders tensed, and for a moment, it looked like she might actually turn around and march back toward Kelly. The audience held its collective breath, sensing that they were about to witness something even more explosive than what had already transpired. Instead, Cameron turned slowly, her face a mask of controlled fury that was somehow more intimidating than any outburst could have been. When she spoke, her voice cut through the studio like a blade. "You want to know why I really left Hollywood, Kelly?" Cameron asked, her words precise and deliberate. "It was because of people like you. People who smile to your face and then stab you in the back the moment the cameras start rolling. People who think that tearing others down somehow builds them up." Kelly's triumphant expression faltered slightly, but she pressed on, clearly unable to resist getting in one more dig. "Oh, please spare me the victim routine. You left because you couldn't handle the competition from younger, more talented actresses. You left because you knew your time was up." Cameron walked back toward the center of the stage, her movements deliberate and controlled. The audience watched in fascination as she positioned herself directly in front of Kelly's chair, close enough that the cameras could capture both women in the same shot. "Younger actresses." Cameron's voice was dangerously quiet. "Kelly, I left at the top of my game. I left after starring in movies that made hundreds of millions of dollars. I left because I chose to, not because I had to. And the fact that you can't understand the difference between choice and failure says everything anyone needs to know about you." Kelly stood up again, unwilling to let Cameron literally look down on her. "Choice, failure, whatever you want to call it. The bottom line is that you quit and now you're back because you need the money and the attention. It's pathetic, really." Cameron smiled, and this time there was genuine amusement in her expression, though it wasn't kind. "You know what's pathetic, Kelly? Spending every day of your professional life living vicariously through other people's accomplishments. You've never created anything original, never taken a real risk, never put yourself on the line for art or passion or anything meaningful." The words hit Kelly like physical blows, and her composure finally cracked completely. "I've built an empire," she screamed, her voice echoing through the studio. "I have millions of viewers who tune in every day to see me, to hear what I have to say. They tune in to see your guests," Cameron corrected coldly. "You're just the person who asks the questions. You're replaceable, Kelly. Any reasonably attractive person with decent people skills could do your job, but not everyone could do mine." Kelly's face went white with rage, then flushed red again as the implications of Cameron's words sank in. She looked around wildly, as if suddenly remembering that this entire exchange was being broadcast to millions of people. "Security," Kelly called out, though her voice cracked slightly on the word. "I want her removed from my studio immediately." Cameron laughed, a sound that held no warmth whatsoever. "Don't worry, Kelly. I wouldn't stay in this toxic environment another second if you paid me." Which, by the way, you couldn't afford to do anyway. As Cameron turned to leave again, Kelly made one final desperate attempt to regain control of the situation. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced to the audience, her voice shaking with barely contained emotion. "This is exactly the kind of entitled behavior that drove Cameron Diaz out of Hollywood in the first place." Cameron stopped walking and turned back one last time, her expression now showing something that looked almost like pity. "Kelly," she said, her voice suddenly calm and almost gentle. "This entire interview, everything you've said and done here today is going to follow you for the rest of your career. People are going to remember how you treated a guest on your show, how you abandoned every principle of hospitality and professionalism because you couldn't control your own insecurities." Kelly opened her mouth to respond, but Cameron held up a hand to stop her. "I came here as your friend," Cameron continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. "I came here excited to share my story, to connect with your audience, to celebrate the fact that I'm passionate about acting again. And you turned it into this ugly, mean-spirited attack because you couldn't handle being in the presence of someone who's actually accomplished something significant." The studio was completely silent now, even the crew members frozen in place as they watched this unprecedented confrontation unfold. Cameron looked directly into the main camera, addressing the television audience directly. "To everyone watching at home," she said, her voice clear and strong, "this is not what interviews should look like. This is not how guests should be treated. This is what happens when someone's jealousy and bitterness overcome their professionalism and basic human decency." She turned back to Kelly, who was standing frozen in place, clearly realizing that she had made a catastrophic error in judgment. "Good luck explaining this to your producers, Kelly," Cameron said quietly. "Good luck explaining to your audience why you chose to attack someone who came here in good faith. And good luck looking at yourself in the mirror tonight, knowing that millions of people just saw who you really are underneath all that fake sweetness." With that, Cameron walked off the stage, her head held high and her dignity intact, despite the brutal nature of the confrontation. The audience remained silent until she disappeared behind the curtains, and then the murmurs began, growing louder as people processed what they had just witnessed. Kelly stood alone in the center of her stage, her red blazer now wrinkled and her makeup slightly smeared, looking around desperately, as if hoping someone would tell her how to salvage the situation. But there was no coming back from what had just happened. No amount of editing or damage control could undo the fact that she had systematically destroyed a guest on live television, revealing herself to be exactly the kind of person that Cameron had accused her of being. The cameras continued rolling for several more seconds, capturing Kelly's stunned expression as she realized the magnitude of what she had done. Then, finally, someone called cut, and the studio lights dimmed slightly as the crew scrambled to figure out what to do next. Cameron Diaz had walked off Kelly Clarkson's show, but she had won the war in the most decisive way possible. She had exposed Kelly's true nature to millions of viewers, and in doing so had reminded everyone why she had been one of Hollywood's most beloved stars for so many years. So, what do you think? Was Kelly's attack on Cameron justified, or did she cross a line that should never be crossed in professional interviews? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more explosive celebrity stories that you won't find anywhere.